what you need to know. Michelle Obama, speaking on the first night of the Democratic National Convention, addressed her distress over President Trump's leadership. Casting aside her reluctance to engage in political combat, Michelle Obama delivered an impassioned keynote address to cap off the first night of the Democratic Convention and offered a withering assessment of President Trump, accusing him of creating chaos, sowing division and governing with a total and utter lack of empathy. Mrs. Obama, the former First Lady, spoke emphatically into the camera and gave a scathing, point-by-point analysis of Mr. Trump's presidency in an urgent summons for Democratic voters to cast ballots in any way they could, even if it meant waiting in long lines to do so. She began by questioning the very legitimacy of Mr. Trump's election in 2016, pointing out that he had lost the popular tally by 3 million votes. She went on to attack the president's response to the coronavirus pandemic and said that the strong economy Mr. Trump inherited from her husband 4 years ago was in shambles. She also said Mr. Trump's divisive approach on race relations had emboldened torch-bearing white supremacists, and ripped him for a lack of leadership or consolation or any semblance of steadiness. Mrs. Obama began all of this by declaring, "You know, I hate politics." Then she dove right in. "Let me be as honest and clear as I possibly can. Donald Trump is the wrong president for our country, Mrs. Obama said, offering a potent closing argument to a packed online program that seemed, at times, like an overpopulated Zoom call. He has more than enough time to prove that he can do the job, but he is clearly in over his head. He cannot meet this moment. He simply cannot be who we need him to be for us. It is what it is," she added. Mrs. Obama's speech, which aired in the final hour, has been in the can for at least a week, according to people familiar with the matter. The speech was pre-recorded because event planners did not want to risk running it live, in anticipation of opening night technical glitches. Back in 2012, President Barack Obama's advisors routinely referred to Mrs. Obama as the most popular political figure in the country, and many thought her rousing, resonant and mostly optimistic speech at the Democratic Convention in Charlotte that year was the apex of that non-virtual event. Her tone, like the Times, was very different on Monday night. Mrs. Obama, reaching the end of her 20-minute time slot, cast the race not as merely the most important election of her lifetime, but as a last chance, of sorts, to redeem the nation from the steep moral, political and economic decline precipitated by Mr. Trump. So, if you take one thing from my words tonight, it is this: if you think things cannot possibly get worse, trust me, they can, and they will if we don't make a change in this election, Mrs. Obama said. If we have any hope of ending this chaos, we have got to vote for Joe Biden like our lives depend on it. A Zoom grid showed people across the country reacting to Michelle Obama's convention speech. Credit EPA, via Shutterstock. Democrats opened the most extraordinary presidential nominating convention in recent history on Monday night with a program that spanned the ideological gamut from socialists to Republicans, and at times more closely resembled an online awards show than a traditional summer pageant of American democracy. The 2-hour event, truncated and conducted virtually because of the coronavirus crisis, was a vivid illustration of how widespread opposition to President Trump and the still raging pandemic have upended the country's politics. Kicking off a 4-day conclave during which they hope to both win over moderates who are uneasy with Mr. Trump's divisive leadership and energize liberals who are unenthusiastic about their own nominee, former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr., Democrats reached for the recent past. They showcased the leader of the left and their reigning presidential runner-up, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, a handful of Republican defectors, including former Gov. John R. Kasich of Ohio, and the most popular figure from the previous administration, the former First Lady, Michelle Obama. With no arena, and no loudspeaker to introduce the presenters, Democrats turned to an MC, of sorts, the actress Eva Longoria, who kept the evening moving between pre-recorded and live video presentations. A lineup of political luminaries delivered remarks in rapid-fire format, and only a few of them, Mrs. Obama, for one, and Mr. Sanders, possess the sheer star power to linger in the perception of the audience. The past 4 years have left us, as a nation, diminished and divided, Ms. Longoria said at the opening of the program, alluding to the pandemic, its economic devastation and much else. After introductory segments, the program devoted attention to the protests against racial injustice, appearing above the Black Lives Matter logo painted on the street across from the White House. The mayor of the District of Columbia, Muriel Lee Bowser, recounted her anger over Mr. Trump's deployment of federal troops against protesters this summer. "I said enough for every black and brown American who has experienced injustice," Ms. Bowser said. Perhaps the most searing critique of Mr. Trump came not from an elected official but from Kristin Urquiza, a young woman whose father, a Trump supporter, died of the coronavirus. Speaking briefly and in raw terms about her loss, Ms. Urquiza said of her father, "His only pre-existing condition was trusting Donald Trump, and for that he paid with his life." On the opening night of the Democratic National Convention, Senator Bernie Sanders encouraged his supporters to back Joseph R. Biden Jr. for president. Credit. Democratic National Convention, via Associated Press. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont on Monday portrayed it as an imperative to defeat President Trump, offering a call for unity to progressive voters who supported him during the primary. "Many of the ideas we fought for that just a few years ago were considered radical are now mainstream," he said. "But let us be clear. If Donald Trump is re-elected, all the progress we have made will be in jeopardy." At its most basic, he added, "This election is about preserving our democracy." Mr. Sanders came up short against Joseph R. Biden Jr. in the Democratic primary race, but he ended his campaign and lined up behind his rival more quickly this year than he had done in his 2016 race against Hillary Clinton. Addressing his supporters, Mr. Sanders expressed gratitude and said that our movement continues and is getting stronger every day. He noted that he and Mr. Biden disagreed over health care, but he nonetheless presented Mr. Biden as worthy of support. "Together we must build a nation that is more equitable, more compassionate and more inclusive," Mr. Sanders said. "I know that Joe Biden will begin that fight on day one." Mr. Sanders made an explicit appeal to those who supported candidates other than Mr. Biden during the primary race, warning that the price of failure is just too great to imagine. "My friends, I say to you, to everyone who supported other candidates in the primary and to those who may have voted for Donald Trump in the last election, the future of our democracy is at stake," Mr. Sanders said. "The future of our economy is at stake. The future of our planet is at stake." Senator Amy Klobuchar spoke of her time on the campaign trail. Credit, DNCC, via Getty Images. Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, whose centrist run for the Democratic presidential nomination echoed many of the same themes struck by Joseph R. Biden Jr. in his campaign, made the case for moderation and compromise on Monday in a party moving rapidly to the left. "Unity isn't about settling," said Ms. Klobuchar, who provided a key endorsement for Mr. Biden before the critical Super Tuesday contests. "It's about striving for something more. It isn't the end, it's the means. It's how to get stuff done." She had been seen as a possible vice presidential pick, but she removed herself from contention in June and urged Mr. Biden to choose a woman of color. Her appearance was followed by a montage of Biden love from other 2020 presidential candidates, including his new running mate, Senator Kamala Harris of California, and Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York, Governor Jay Inslee of Washington, Representative Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, former Representative Beto O'Rourke of Texas, Tom Steyer, and Andrew Yang. Ms. Klobuchar joined the chorus of Democrats calling out Mr. Trump for attacking the legitimacy of mail-in balloting and opposing increased funding for the Postal Service. "I believe the right to vote is fundamental and the post office is essential," Ms. Klobuchar said. "The president may hate the post office, but he's still going to have to send them a change of address card come January." Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada addressed mail-in voting, credit, DNCC, via Getty Images. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada on Monday defended the integrity of voting by mail. President Trump has assailed voting by mail for months, claiming baselessly that the process is riddled with fraud. Ms. Cortez Masto, the former Attorney General of Nevada, pushed back. Despite what the president says, voting by mail has been a secure, proven option for decades, Ms. Cortez Masto, the first Latina senator in history, said. She added that Mr. Trump was putting the lives of Nevada's seniors at risk by trying to defund the post office. "Here's what that means: seniors won't be able to get their prescriptions because he wants to win an election," she continued. "Well, Mr. President, Nevada is not intimidated by you. America is not intimidated by you. We are united by shared values, shared history and shared rights, including our fundamental right to vote." Senator Doug Jones spoke at the convention Monday night, credit, Democratic National Convention, via Associated Press. Senator Doug Jones of Alabama, the most endangered Democratic incumbent this year, invoked the legacy of two of his state's civil rights heroes, Rosa Parks and Representative John Lewis, to rally support for Mr. Biden. Mr. Jones faces a tough fight against former Auburn University football coach Tommy Tuberville in a state that supported Mr. Trump over Hillary Clinton by nearly 30-point margin. He was, not surprisingly, one of the few speakers on Monday not to criticize Mr. Trump by name, instead referring vaguely to some politicians who try to pit us against each other. But he tried to keep the message hopeful, upbeat and grounded in his state's seminal role in the fight for racial equality in the 1960s. It was here in Alabama where Rosa Parks helped ignite a movement by refusing to give up her seat on the bus, where freedom riders of different races came together in pursuit of equality, he added. And it was here in Alabama where John Lewis marched across a bridge toward freedom. When John R. Kasich, then Ohio's governor, ran for the Republican presidential nomination in 2016, he warned about two paths facing voters. Primary voters did not pick the path that Mr. Kasich had recommended, and Donald J. Trump became the party's nominee. Now, Mr. Kasich is the most prominent Republican on the schedule for the Democratic Convention, and he plans to vote for Mr. Biden this fall. "I'm a lifelong Republican, but that attachment holds second place to my responsibility to my country," Mr. Kasich said. "That's why I've chosen to appear at this convention. In normal times, something like this would probably never happen. But these are not normal times, Mr. Kasich spoke of paths once again on Monday, using a visual to drive home the point. He appeared at the little intersection of two paths. He said the current path had led to division, dysfunction, irresponsibility and growing vitriol between our citizens. Mr. Kasich offered praise for Mr. Biden, whom he said he had known for 30 years, describing him as a good man, a man of faith, a unifier. I'm sure there are Republicans and independents who couldn't imagine crossing over to support a Democrat, Mr. Kasich said. They fear Joe may turn sharp left and leave them behind. Don't believe that, because I know the measure of the man. He added, no one pushes Joe around. Aboard Air Force One on Monday, Mr. Trump dismissed Mr. Kasich as a loser. He was a loser as a Republican and he'll be a loser as a Democrat, the president said. Major loser as a Republican. I guess you can quote me on that. John was a loser as a Republican. Never even came close. And as a Democrat he'll be an even greater loser. One by one, the Republican women appeared on the screen. There was the former governor of New Jersey, who served in the George W. Bush administration, a former Republican candidate for governor of California and a longtime Republican congresswoman. And one by one, they each took the extraordinary step of making the affirmative case for the Democratic presidential nominee, on the first night of his convention, the presence, at Joseph R. Biden Jr.'s virtual convention, of former Governor Christine Todd Whitman of New Jersey, Meg Whitman, a former Republican candidate in California and now the chief executive of the streaming company Quibi, and a former Representative Susan Molinari of New York, underscored the depths of President Trump's challenges with moderate voters, especially women, who have increasingly moved away from the GOP under his leadership. And Mr. Biden's decision to feature those Republicans also highlighted his campaign's efforts to engage independent voters and moderate Republicans who are disillusioned with President Trump's divisive style, even if they are also uncomfortable with the most liberal wing of the Democratic Party. This isn't about a Republican or Democrat, Christine Todd Whitman, the former governor said. It's about a person. A person decent enough, stable enough, strong enough, to get our economy back on track. A person who can work with everyone, Democrats and Republicans, to get things done. Donald Trump isn't that person. Joe Biden is. Meg Whitman of Quibi, who introduced herself as a longtime Republican and a longtime CEO, said that the president has no clue how to run a business, let alone an economy. And Dems, Molinari, who noted that she had long known Mr. Trump, also a New Yorker, and had also worked with Mr. Biden, vouched for the Democrats' character. Former Ohio Governor John Kasich, a Republican who ran for the GOP nomination in 2016, followed Ms. Molinari, and the segment closed with a video of testimonials featuring Republicans voting for Mr. Biden. The speaker's remarks about Mr. Biden were brief, and they are not representative of most Republican voters who, polls show, are strongly supportive of Mr. Trump. A number of the speakers also supported Hillary Clinton in 2016. But their prominent presence at the Democratic convention sent a clear message about the opportunity the Biden campaign sees to make inroads with disaffected moderates who feel politically homeless in the Trump era. Kristin Urquiza, whose father died of the coronavirus, spoke before the Democratic National Convention about his misplaced faith in President Trump. Some of the most striking comments of the first hour of the Democratic Convention on Monday came from a woman few Americans may have heard of before Monday. That speaker, Kristin Urquiza, whose father died this summer in Arizona, opened her brief but impassioned speech bluntly. "I'm one of the many who have lost a loved one to COVID," she said. "My dad, Mark Anthony Urquiza, should be here today, but he isn't. The reason," she asserted, "was President Trump. My dad was a healthy 65-year-old, she said. His only pre-existing condition was trust in Donald Trump, and for that he paid with his life." Ms. Urquiza garnered attention this year when she wrote an obituary published in the Arizona Republic in which she laid blame for her father's death at the feet of state and federal leaders and their handling of the coronavirus pandemic. On Monday, she walked through her thinking for a national television audience, saying that her father had voted for Mr. Trump, had faith in him, and had believed it would be okay to go to a karaoke bar soon after Arizona's stay-at-home order had been lifted. Speaking as pictures of her father flashed across the screen, Ms. Urquiza said he had died alone, in the ICU, with a nurse holding his hand. Donald Trump may not have caused the coronavirus, but his dishonesty and his irresponsible actions made it so much worse, she said. One of the last things that my father said to me was that he felt betrayed by the likes of Donald Trump, she added, and so when I cast my vote for Joe Biden, I will do it for my dad. Ms. Urquiza's message is already being underscored in an advertisement from New Estro PAC, a super PAC led by former aides to Bernie Sanders that is focusing on turning out Latino voters. The ad, which will air in Arizona and North Carolina to start, begins with Ms. Urquiza thumbing through photos of her father. My father died of COVID in an ICU room, with a nurse holding his hand, she says. My father, like so many others, should not have died from COVID-19. His death is due to the carelessness of Donald Trump and the politicians who continue to jeopardize our health through a clear lack of leadership. Gov. Gretchen Whitmer at a press event in Lansing, Michigan. Credit, Michigan Governor's Office, via Associated Press. Gov. Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan on Monday invoked the coronavirus as she talked out the leadership that Joseph R. Biden Jr. and his running mate, Senator Kamala Harris, would bring to addressing the pandemic. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will lead by example, Ms. Whitmer said. It'll be science, not politics or ego, that will drive their decisions. They know the health of our people goes hand in hand with the strength of our economy. They know action begets action. Ms. Whitmer continued, over the past few months, we've learned what's essential, rising to the challenge, not denying it. We've learned who is essential, too. Not just the wealthiest among us. Not a president who fights his fellow Americans rather than fight the virus that's killing us and our economy. Ms. Whitmer, a national co-chair of Mr. Biden's presidential campaign, was one of the top contenders to be his running mate. She remains a prominent Biden ally in a battleground state that Mr. Biden is fighting to reclaim after President Trump's victory there in 2016. Governor Andrew Cuomo addressed the convention from Albany, NY. Credit, Democratic National Convention, via Associated Press. Gov. Andrew Cuomo of New York unloaded on President Trump for his response to the coronavirus that savaged his state this spring, accusing the White House of first trying to ignore the crisis then fumbling the response by trying to politicize it. New Yorkers, and viewers of cable news, have seen this performance before. His daily news briefings became must-see television, suddenly making Mr. Cuomo one of the most prominent Democrats in the country after a lack of support scuttled his own hopes of seeking the presidency. Mr. Cuomo, whose initial actions during the pandemic have come under criticism, accused Mr. Trump of learning absolutely nothing from the lessons of the outbreak, and said Democrats wear masks because we are smart. Echoing the rhetoric of other Democrats, including former President Barack Obama, Mr. Cuomo likened the intense partisanship of the Trump era to a disease, and compared the impact of his presidency to a weakening of the immune system in the national body politic. Americans learned a critical lesson, how vulnerable we are when we are divided, he said. And how many lives can be lost when our government is incompetent. Donald Trump didn't create the initial division. The division created Trump. He only made it worse, he added. Representative James E. Clyburn of South Carolina at a news conference on Capitol Hill. Credit, and a moneymaker / the New York Times when Representative James E. Clyburn of South Carolina backed Joseph R. Biden Jr. Shortly before the primary in that state, the endorsement provided Mr. Biden with a much-needed boost that helped him resurrect his campaign. Mr. Clyburn, the highest-ranking African-American in Congress, recalled that endorsement in brief remarks from Charleston. Mr. Biden, he declared, will always be an adopted son of South Carolina. Joe Biden is as good a man as he is a leader, Mr. Clyburn said. I have said before and wish to reiterate tonight, we know Joe, but more importantly, Joe knows us. Mr. Clyburn also spoke of his own community, recalling those who arrived on these shores in bondage, as well as the killing of 9 black churchgoers at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church by a white supremacist in 2015. The ground beneath our feet is seeded with pain that is both old and new, Mr. Clyburn said. But from that soil we always find a way to grow together. Mr. Clyburn cited hopeful signs, the removal of a statue in Charleston of John C. Calhoun, as well as the construction in that city of the International African American Museum. Much like the country as a whole, we are stepping out from the shadows of our past and beginning to lay the groundwork for a more just future, Mr. Clyburn said. It won't be easy. We can only succeed if we move forward together. So we will need a president who sees unifying people as a requirement of the job. George Floyd's family held a moment of silence for the victims of police violence during the opening hour of the Democratic National Convention on Monday night. Credit. Democratic National Convention, via Associated Press. Philonise and Rodney Floyd, brothers of George Floyd, the black Minneapolis man whose killing by the police prompted a wave of national protest, led a moment of silence for the victims of police violence during the opening hour of the convention. My brother George was selfless, he always made sacrifices for his family, friends and even complete strangers, Philonise Floyd said. George had a giving spirit, a spirit that has shown up on streets around our nation and around the world. The Floyd presence underscored the message behind the protests, one of equality and the need to fight systemic racism, something Mr. Biden emphasized during a follow-up discussion with the parents of victims of police violence. The theme is central to Democrats as they face a president who has emulated the law and order message touted by white conservatives since the days of George Wallace and Richard Nixon. The intensity of emotion evoked by the moment of silence, the speeches and the testimonials by parents heightened the sense of urgency in an online event that began in a smooth but somewhat antiseptic fashion. Muriel Lee Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C., speaking moments before the Floyds, launched the first of what will be many attacks on President Trump, accusing him of fanning the flames of racism and plotting to crack down on peaceful protesters calling for racial justice near the White House in June. Representative Gwen Moore, Democrat of Wisconsin, briefly spoke as well. She represents Milwaukee, where Democrats had planned to hold their convention before the pandemic prompted the party to make it mostly virtual. What better way to gather than all across America to nominate my beloved friend Joe Biden to be the 46th President of the United States of America, with my VP nominee, Sister Kamala Harris by his side, Ms. Moore said. Tonight we are gathered to reclaim the soul of America. So if you're ready to come together, America, text JOIN to 30,330. Thank you, I love you all and God bless you. She introduced a video segment that was accompanied by Bruce Springsteen singing the
Show your love for him. Click the link in description. Thanks for watching.